So good evening. Can you hear me all the way back there? Since I don't really bite or burn, so it would be nice if you moved up a little, but that's up to you. So I welcome you this evening. Simon Jacobson is my name. And I also welcome the web audience. So there's this thing called existential loneliness, which many thinkers and philosophers and theologians and psychologists, psychiatrists feel that it lies at the root of most human problems or existential problems. What is this loneliness? So even though we may be, some of us, party animals, and some of us socialites and extroverts, but the fact is that at the end of every day, when the dust settles, so to speak, and we go back home, there's a part of us that always remains somewhat apart, alone in this world. Even if you have people that love you deeply, the mere fact that we are individuals means that something is inside of each of us, each of you, that separates you from everyone else. And we ourselves are sometimes not even in touch with that place, let alone others. And one of the sad things to see, one of the saddest things to see, you talk about performers, artists, musicians, after they do a show, a gig. So while they're up there on stage, and especially if they're good, so you have an audience that adores them, and there's this sense of unity, of connection. But then when everybody goes home, and these artists have to pack up their bags, they usually do it very quietly, lonely, and walk home alone. I know there's a concept of groupies and stuff like that, but still there's a point where there's a deep loneliness. And each of us has our own, that lonely place. The reason it's so difficult to really identify is because by nature, it has no words. It's hard to describe that space inside of us. The things we describe about, as I discussed last week at length, the things we talk about most are the things that we are interacting with the world and with others. Our loneliness corner is something we don't really talk about. That's why it's so lonely. And even though on its own it may seem innocent, but what kind of forces does it unleash in our lives? The fact that we have that part of us. How much of that is, for instance, the driving force behind our search for a relationship, for love, for intimacy, for companionship? Some say it's just to soothe our journey in this world and make it a little more bearable and not to feel so alone. Other cynics will say, no matter what you do, you always are alone. And there really is no one else that can accompany you on your journey. So this is a big topic in Torah and Judaism. Unfortunately, these are the topics that usually are not discussed. In many ways, religion in general and Judaism in particular have been hijacked, as I've discussed many times in this class, by, we call it the mechanical side of it. So much focus on the actions and on the conformity to follow certain guidelines, which no doubt are also part of Torah, but so much focus on the do's and don'ts and the punishment or anger or the wrath of God that we provoke when we don't follow God's will, that what's lost is the soulful message that talks about the most existential and beyond existential concepts in life. The things that matter most to us, as I said, love, loneliness, dealing with our emotional issues. That relevance is often dearly lacking in Jewish schools, and even conventional, even the best of Torah education focuses much more on the facts of what the Torah wants of us, rather than on its relevance to our personal lives. Which is why I made it the mission of this class, even though I don't like the word class in the first place, but whatever you want to call this, a gathering, to focus on the personal relevance, not so much on the details. You can take any verse in the Torah and literally spend your whole life analyzing every detail, and you have the commentaries, and there are hundreds of commentaries, and then you have commentaries on commentaries, and then you have arguments and counter-arguments and questions, and it's all quite fascinating and very stimulating, actually. You go into any base medrash, any academy, yeshiva, and you'll find young people, older people, arguing the fine points, like good lawyers, of the Talmud, of different interpretations of the verses in the Torah. But you rarely will find them talking about why is it relevant to their lives. So it creates almost a dissonance, a detachment, between learning the halachas, the laws, and the commandments, and the mechanics, and what it has to do with your life. Now the dissonance expresses itself most in a concept called, in the words of the Nachmanides, the Ramban, called Novel B'Reshus HaTorah. Novel B'Reshus HaTorah, the Ramban asks a question in the one chapter in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter Kadeshim Tiyu. So there's the commandment that you shall sanctify yourselves. Kadeshim Tiyu, you shall be sanctified or sacred. Ki Kodesh Ani. God is speaking because I am sacred. So the Ramban asks the question, the Torah is full of commandments that refer to V'nigdashti, V'skadashtem, many verses that talk about different mitzvahs that relate to sanctifying a person's life. The laws of kosher, laws of purity, many laws that refer to the words kedusha. Even every mitzvah, we make a blessing on a mitzvah, we say, Asher kedushanu, b'mitzvahso v'tzivonu, Asher kedushanu. That you sanctifies us with these mitzvahs. So the Ramban asked the question, so why does the Torah feel necessary? What does it come to add? This particular mitzvah, this particular spelled out, Kadeshim to you shall be sanctified. All the mitzvahs deal with that in one way or another. Sanctifying your life, refining your life. And his answer is that there is a concept called novel b'Reshus HaTorah. How do we translate novel? Let's say a novel. A novel is an obnoxious low life. Is one way to put it. Not so necessarily politically correct. A despicable person or despicable behavior. B'Reshus HaTorah, and does it dressed up in the garments of the Torah. This is the Ramban is writing not about the 21st, 20th century. He's writing it in his time, the 10th, 11th century. That there's a concept, and the Torah is coming to warn us about, and actually command us about, that you can take the whole Torah and still be a despicable person. Because if you detach the laws from personal relevance, so the laws are very fine laws, but you don't act by them. And that is itself a mitzvah, to sanctify your life and turn it personally relevant. I would say that what's one of our great challenges of our time, for all of us, whether you grew up in a secular home, where you did not necessarily have a Jewish education, or a minimal one. So I've met many such people. And some of you are such, or come from, or know people like that. I would say the majority of the Jewish people fall into that category today. What lies at the heart of their disconnection to Judaism? They don't find it relevant. There's no personal relevance. So therefore you go search for relevance elsewhere. That's why 60% of Buddhists in America are Jewish. And you have Jews in every type of discipline, whether it's Far Eastern or others, searching for some type of meaning. If you don't find it in your own backyard, you search elsewhere. Because everybody in some way or another is going to look for some type of relevance. For those who grew up in a very observant home or environment where they went to yeshiva their entire life, the challenge is, and I grew up in that environment, so I can tell you more firsthand, the challenge is equally powerful to make it relevant. Because just because you follow it by rote or mechanical, because it comes second nature to you, to say Moda'ani, the prayer in the morning, or to daven 3 times a day, or to go to the mikveh, or to eat kosher, it can be completely mechanical. It had nothing to do with your efforts, it's to do with how you were programmed as a child. It'd be better than nothing, but it's a far cry from what we call personal relevance. Is it even by choice? Everybody in this world more or less conforms to what they grew up with. It's the rare person that really breaks away. Even though no one likes to be called a conformist, the fact is, who are the conformists if everybody doesn't feel they're a conformist? They're somewhere out there, right? So no different growing up in a religious home, you could also be a conformist. And that conformity takes the shape of what you grew up with. It's the easiest thing for you. It's the most comfortable thing. I never had a challenge to eat a cheeseburger. It always repulsed me, meat and milk. Not for religious reasons, frankly, because I grew up with it, knowing that that's, you don't do it. And after a while, you just don't do it. So you can be a mechanical Jew, and that's why the Torah comes to warn us as well. You'll find throughout the Torah, throughout the Bible, you'll find an expression called hayom. Moses says many times, Atem nitzavim hayom, v'yadaita hayom. Many places where the word hayom is used. Hayom means today. So the question is asked, which day is he talking about? Is it the day when Moses spoke thousands of years ago? Or is it today when we read it now? We also read today, 2008. What's the date? December, whatever it is, 10th. So the Medrash, and Rashi cites this in a few places, says Hayom is telling us an important message. Do not look at the Torah as an old story that is about history, about things that happened to other people, but see it as a kidyut k'mo chadasha, as a new revelation right now. It's as if these words are being said right now to you. Now tell me of a stronger statement of personal relevance than that. And now go find a Jew in the world that can tell you and read every chapter in the Torah and show you how it's relevant to my life here in the 21st century with all the challenges we have. So you'd think a person who's the most observant of all, that went to yeshiva all his life or her life, should be the first one to tell you, here, I'll tell you the personal relevance of every verse in the Torah. I'd love you to bring that person to this class here and introduce me to such a person. Very rare. Because part of the mechanics is that you feel that you grew up with it. That's all. People almost think that that's enough. So we're all in the same boat, let's put it bluntly. And that's the boat of how do you, in a difficult world, an agnostic world, one where it's easy to deny God's existence. And even the biggest believers in God, and sincere believers, don't necessarily follow their lives as if God is watching them every second. I'd like you to show me someone like that. In other words, faith also experiences a dissonance. You can live in a world, you can be a person of faith and still live in a world and not necessarily follow your faith. Yeah, some things you don't do, as they say, as pasnish. You don't do it because it doesn't look good. But that's an external. What's going on in places where no one's watching? So I'm not saying this to be critical of anyone, it's just to be honest. That there is no holier than thou. We all live in the same world. It's a world where Godness is concealed. And you find people who are not necessarily grew up in a very observant home, who are extremely refined human beings. And unfortunately, you find people who are very observant technically, and are very unrefined, novel, Bereshus HaTorah, or worse. This is the situation we're in. And therefore our challenge is, how do you dig into this Torah and make it relevant, personal way? So whatever topic it is that we're addressing, it all comes down to, what are the issues that concern us, concern your life? Most people you ask, if you have a psychological challenge, you're not getting along with your parents, or with your children, or with friends, or your own psychological ghosts that haunt you. How many people are going to open up a Chumash and say, okay, let me see the lesson of this week's Torah portion and my psychological issues? Most will go to, once they get beyond denial, will probably go to a therapist or find a book to read. Some will say Tehillim, that the book of Psalms people pray for, especially in times of crisis. But that's more of a type of thing by faith. Say Tehillim, God will solve the problems. I'm not dismissing that. That has strength. But as we read in this week's chapter, when Jacob prepared for battle, he didn't just say Tehillim, he didn't just pray. He also prepared for war. After 20 years of being away from his brother Esau, and Esau wanted to kill him. So he prayed, he prepared for war with Esau in case that would be necessary. And he prepared a gift to appease him. And as such, all three are necessary. So when we talk about the challenge, it's a very strong one, and I always take it myself personally. And it's not always that easy. It's to dig deeper into any particular story and really discover its personal relevance. Because I have no doubt that Judaism did not last for 4,000 years, time of Abraham till this day, almost 4,000 years, because Jews were conformists. And they just blindly followed what their parents told them. First of all, Jews are not conformists. They generally always argue about everything. And above all, when you read the story of Abraham, Abraham was the biggest revolutionary of all. He didn't have a yeshiva to go to. There was a yeshiva, Shem Ve'ever, and so on, but there was no community. There was no borough park, and there was no geula, and there was no Meir Sharim, there was nothing. He was a man that stood on one side of the world and everyone against him. He had to break away from his family and from everything that was conformist to establish his faith. So the whole birth of Judaism was born in revolution, not born in conformity. At some point, in some weird way, it became a conformist system, which is of such a big turnoff for anyone that's a thinking person. To me, the only real secret why Judaism lasted was because the Jews found personal relevance in it. That in the harshest of times, they were not ready to give up their faith, even though it would have been an easier approach to save their skin, their lives, because they found personal relevance in it. And when you're dealing with the most internal issues of life, with love and intimacy and meaning and purpose, and you discover that, you're ready to live even in discomfort. And more than discomfort, persecution, genocides. Because a faith of that nature that's so vital to you and so relevant to you is not something you're ready to give up. Because if you think about it, there are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews who had the option. They could have easily chosen the path of conversion or the cross or whatever it was that they were given the ultimatum. They could say, look, so I'll bow down to this cross or to this getchka, to this idol. At least I can go back home to my children. They'll have a provider. How could I deprive them? Because of my faith, I should allow myself to be killed and my wife remains a widow and children orphans. And this was not one instant. You have hundreds of thousands of such instances. From the times of Egypt, through the Middle Ages, till the Holocaust and on. The answer was because they realized that life is more than just material survival. Yeah, you may compromise all your faiths and beliefs, and you come home, your children have a father and your wife has a husband. But what are you left with? You compromise the most important thing, which is why we're here on this earth. And people who are ready to die, their children should at least know that their parents died for a belief that this world can be a better place, that virtue ultimately will prevail over evil, even though it doesn't always look that way. And even when they were being killed in the name of such evil, they still did not give up that faith. Now that tells you something. That tells you that it must have been profoundly relevant. How many people do you know under torture, under severe circumstances, would not compromise even the most important values? You hear stories about people climbing mountains, and they're about to freeze to death, and they turn on each other, cannibalism. Because what hunger does to people makes you insane. And then there are those that were living in the Soviet Union or others that were tortured. And some, unfortunately, did things like the kapos who did things to their own brothers and sisters just to save their own lives. God forbid, no one should ever be challenged that way. But I ask you all, if you were in such a circumstance, do you know what you would do? So any honest person would say, how could I know? We'd not like to believe that we can become ugly people. But, many beautiful people have fallen. The Jews can say that for the thousands of years of their survival, even though there were exceptions, but overall, they did not compromise their values even when it came to save their own lives. And that has to tell you that there's a profound relevance. There's no way you do that as a conformist. A conformist is the first thing you'll drop is everything that's mechanical. There's nothing deeply connected. You do it because you grew up with it. So our challenge in our time, this is somewhat of an introduction to all the classes that I give, but as going back to the topic I will discuss in a moment about loneliness, is the key challenge of our time, which is how to apply these timeless teachings in a relevant way. Now, some of you may wonder, or you may have learned this in yeshiva, there's the concept of called Kabbalas Oil, which means that the Jews, when they stood at Mount Sinai, as opposed to other nations, they said, we will do and then we will understand. Which really you can say negates everything I just said, which is, I was just explaining that it has to be personally relevant, we have to ask questions to make it, to understand it, to integrate it, to relate to it. So what is this concept of I will do and I will understand? Doing sounds like you just do even if you don't understand. So first of all, it's misunderstood in a simple way. Nasa v'nishma, which, we will do and then we will understand, has two parts to it. Yes, you do even though you don't fully understand or understand at all, but then comes the second half of it, which is to understand. A big part of the Torah is understanding God. Das alekei avicha, v'yedaita Hashem elkeich. Knowing, not just faith. As a matter of fact, there's some commentaries that say that faith is not a mitzvah at all. Why? Because it's basically a catch-22. If you don't believe in God, it won't help to be told that God gave you a mitzvah. So faith has to precede a mitzvah. What is then the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to know God, not just to believe. And knowing is a whole different story. Knowing God, some people can say, Eilanu esik b'nestaris, we don't have any knowledge of the unknown. But God made himself knowable. Ata haresa ladas, we're told. So, even though there may be the foundation of every system is accepting, of course, you have a 1-year-old child in your home, a child, 5-year-old, you don't ask them, what's your opinion, what's your philosophical opinion, how to live virtuously. Healthy parents provide a system the best one they can provide. So all life begins, obviously, by doing things even before we understand it. The question is whether you stop there and you remain mechanical, or at some point do you fulfill the second half of the mitzvah, which maybe one can say is even more challenging, and that is integrated now, not just mechanical. What does it mean, and how is it relevant? And then, of course, there's some people, you can't just argue and say, listen, you have to accept. There are people who just by nature are skeptics, and they're not just going to accept because someone tells you to accept. They will challenge. So this is our challenge in our time, is how to make these things relevant. So in this chapter, there are many relevant messages, and I've discussed them over the years. The one I chose to talk about tonight, which somewhat is an effect, I guess also as a result of some of the events in the world lately, especially what happened in Mumbai, which just shaken up so many of us, and just exposes the vulnerability of the world in which we live, even though it is such a so-called progressive world, technologically developed and so on. And we've suddenly brought back to primitive, horrific behavior, including targeting Jews, of course, yet again, in India of all places. A country, as they say, that really does not have anti-Semitism, at least in an institutional way. But in general, you don't need much to remind yourself of the vulnerability of life and the existential loneliness that I was discussing earlier. So though this chapter has many details to it, what I wanted to talk about was few verses. So as I mentioned before, we're dealing with Jacob reconciling with Esau. That's the mechanical, technical part of the story is Jacob returns back to Israel after 20 years spending time building a family in Haran with his uncle Laban. and becomes his father-in-law. And now he returns, and the first thing he does upon return is have to address his brother Esau. This itself, the confrontation of Jacob and Esau, is a story of its own. I've, as I said, elaborated on many times. If any of you want interested in more of the details, some of them I will talk about. I've written about it, and also there are recordings of it. So, by all means, feel free to either access me or go to the website meaningfullife.com. Double. Please invite them all in. For a little Torah. So there's a small short episode when Jacob returns. As I said, he prepares through prayer, war, and appeasement. By the way, what ends up happening, he doesn't need the war, he just needs the appeasing and the prayer. So he finally meets his brother, he's about to meet his brother Esau. So in preparation, because of his fears, so even the great Jacob was afraid, as the Torah says, how he speaks to God. He's humbled and afraid, he's not sure whether his merits will withstand the challenges. So then, he says that he takes his entire family and crosses the river, Yavok, the small river that was there. And then he goes back, and here's the verse, I'll just read it. In its original. So it goes like this. So Jacob awoke in the middle of the night, took his family and all his belongings and crossed over the river. But then the Torah continues and says like this: Vayishlach Yaakov levade. Jacob remained alone. So alone, levade. Vayavik ishimai. And ish is just a very general, it can mean a stranger, it could be a person, it could be a man. Ish is a very general term. So you can say Vayavik, the stranger wrestled with him. Ad alisa shachar, until dawn. Vayarki lo yochaloi, and the stranger saw that he could not prevail over Jacob. So vayiga b'chaf yireche, he touched his hip bone. Kaf yerech Yaakov, and he severed the hip. V'yavik as he battled with him. And then the Torah continues and says that the stranger tells Jacob, "Let me go, send me away," because Jacob clearly was holding on to him, because the dawn has come. And Jacob makes the condition, "I will not send you unless you bless me." So he asks him, "What is his name?" He says his name is Jacob, Yaakov. And the stranger tells him, "No longer will your name be Jacob, or Yaakov, from now on your name will be Israel, Yisrael." And why? Because Kisarisa im Elokim v'anoshim v'tucha, which means literally means you battled with Elokim. Actually is a name for God, but here it's referring to an angel of God, and v'anoshim, and with people, and v'tucha, you've prevailed. And then the story continues, it becomes even more cryptic when Jacob asks the stranger, "What is your name?" And he says, "Why do you want to know my name?" And the story really never ends. And he blessed him, and that's when the story concludes with that. Following this episode, Jacob continues on his way with his family, and then finally confronts Esau. So this has become one of the classic stories called biblical classics. Jacob wrestling with the angel. There are books with that title, Wrestling. Jacob's Wrestling. And it's a dramatic story, the idea of wrestling with an angel, wrestling with God in a way. But above all, what is its personal relevance? So I'm not going to go through all the layers of the commentaries. You can do that on your own if you like. Or you can just go into any yeshiva, and I'm sure they'll oblige you and tell you all the commentaries, as I said, all the arguments and counter-arguments about it. I don't mean that to be, I'm not trying to be cynical, because there's no question there's a very powerful dimension to that part of it, but there's another side to it, which is the soul of the Torah. The Zohar, the classic work of Jewish mysticism, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, didn't actually write it, his student Rav Abba wrote it, but he dictated it, writes that in the Torah there's a body and there's a soul. Gufa daraisa and Neshmasa daraisa. These are words from the Zohar. There's the body of the Torah, that's the mechanics. How do you keep Shabbos? You open up a Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law, based on the Talmud, based on the verses in the Torah, and you know the details. This is what you do when Shabbos comes in, what foods to eat, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, how you pray, what you pray. It's called Hilchah Shabbos. That's Gufa Daraisa, that's the body of the Torah. You want to know the soul of the Torah, Neshmasa Daraisa, what does it mean? Why? Why is it so relevant that there are these prohibitions? Why shouldn't you do this work, and why do other things? There you need to go into the soul of the Torah. And as I said before, that's the one that's most lacking. So the technical part of it I just read, and as I said, the commentaries explain. Some say it was the angel of Esav, this stranger. Others have other opinions. According to that opinion, the angel of Esav comes to so-called prepare the ground before he's going to meet Esav. He, in a sense, is defending Esav, this angel. And Jacob prevails over him, which was a good sign because then Jacob could move on and meet Esav himself. There's long discussions about this whole process, the whole thing with the Gid Hanosha, the Kaf HaYerech, the hip, the displaced hip of Jacob. There are actually hundreds and hundreds of pages written just on this displaced hip. This too I wrote about a few years ago, its relevance. But what I'm touching upon, and hopefully I'll try to go through as many details as I can, and there you want to see the real beauty, fascinating beauty of Torah, is when you see its timelessness and its timeliness, meaning how it relates relevant to our personal lives. So you have to go all the way back to the beginning. What does this story mean in the first place? What does it mean that Jacob took all his family? Why did he go back by himself on the other side of the river? So Rashi says, from the Talmud, because he went back for pachim ktanim, for small shards. They had moved all their belongings. Remember, they were traveling with everything. It was like a caravan. And some things were left over, so it says Jacob went back for the pachim ktanim. He went back to get these small shards, these small containers. Pachim are like small vessels. And that's when he encounters the stranger. The Talmud goes further. Why did he have to go back for these pachim ktanim? So the Talmud derives from this that a tzaddik focuses even on details. In other words, nothing's too small. It's not, even though he had his family and had the major belongings, every detail was necessary to take with him. You'll soon see the relevance of that. And that's where he encounters the stranger. So if we want to understand its personal psychological relevance to our lives, we have to know and understand the details of the story. And who is Jacob, and what does Jacob reflect? So as a small little intro to explain this, it's vital to dispel a certain important myth. The Bible, the Torah, when you read it ostensibly, and you wonder, what is this book about? So some call it a book of laws. Come in, welcome. Some call it a book of laws. Others say it's history. The stories of Adam and Eve in the garden, then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so on, and Moses and Egypt, and then the 40 years of traveling through the wilderness. But the same Zohar that I described before says that anyone that says that the Torah is just a book of stories, the Zohar, I don't want to repeat what the Zohar says. The Zohar is very negative, very, very critical of anyone that says that. So then what is this Torah exactly? So as I said, the best that most people will translate is a book of laws, a book of biblical law. Some will say is the basis of civilization, it's the basis of most of our constitutions. Even though there are chapters upon chapters that don't seem at all included in any constitution. There's no question the Ten Commandments and many of the laws are definitely tremendous statements that go back so long ago in history when the world was not run by virtue and justice. It was run by monarchs and dictators and so on. So there's no question, here's a document that laid out so long ago a blueprint that today has become common democracy. But there are large parts of the Torah that many people dismiss, as they say it doesn't seem relevant. So before something is dismissed, we have to define what is the Torah. How does the Torah define itself? So there's an interesting message. The Torah says that just like an architect needs a blueprint, or first creates a blueprint before building, so too God, the architect of the universe, wrote it down in a blueprint, and the Torah is that blueprint. So if you really want to understand so-called the dynamics of existence, the DNA of life, that's what the Torah is all about. It is the inner workings. So if you go to a doctor who takes an X-ray, or a CAT scan, or other scans today, to understand what's going on beneath the surface that you can't see with the naked eye, you can say the Torah is a CAT scan of God's mind that gives you a picture of the inner workings of existence that we cannot see with our own eyes. Now, whether you choose to accept that or not is your business, but it's important to at least state for the record, before you reject something, you have to know what it claims to be. Now, this is a very bold statement. To say that it's a book of God, that God gave the Torah at Sinai, and it tells us how to live our lives, many people can accept that. But to say it's a blueprint of existence, that basically everything in existence is derived from the Torah, that's like an X-ray of all of existence. That means more than physics, and more than all the sciences, and biology, and mathematics, that are all meant to teach us about the inner workings. The Torah is the ultimate blueprint. So I will just say this to you. If you want to know whether this is true or not, and if your rational mind needs to understand whether it's true, there's only really ultimately one proof. It's not going to be a proof, mathematical proof. It's going to be what we call experiential proof. Resonance. If it resonates, and you can see in this book the story of your life, and not in one episode, again and again and again, after a while it's hard to deny, no matter how skeptical you are, that there is a message here that is unbelievably profound. Which is why the true masters of the Torah will tell you these following words. The Torah is not a book about events on earth. It's not a storybook about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their children, and then Moses taking the Jews out of Egypt and all that transpired a few thousand years ago. That is the tip of the iceberg. The way the Shalah puts it, and the Rameh and other Kabbalists and scholars, they say like this: the Torah does not talk about things below and hint at things above. The Torah talks about medaberes belyenim u'meramezes betachteinim. It's not my expression. The Torah talks about things above, meaning on the spiritual and sublime level, and alludes to things below. That's the only way you can really fully understand Torah. I remember hearing this the first time. It blew me away because I went to yeshiva my whole life, like some of you I'm sure did. And whether it was relevant what I learned or not is another discussion. Some was, a lot was not necessarily the way I felt, but you go with the program, so to speak. When I heard this and then I saw it with my own eyes, I said, now I understand. That was why Jews felt it worth to keep this tradition and pass it on for thousands of years. Not just because of certain virtuous statements or nice history and ancestors. That you're talking about the dynamics of existence here. You're talking about the essence of why we're here in the first place. So just to give you an example how this is not so far-fetched, let's think about it in a very human terms. Here we are this evening, we come and met together, meeting together. Some of us are meeting for the first time. Or at least our bodies are meeting for the first time. And what do people do when they meet? So they assess each other, basically. Not necessarily if you're on a date, even if you're not. People are always assessing people. The poem goes, I'm watching people, watch people, watch people, watch people. You can go on as long as you like. So, how do we assess people? First thing is body language. What else can you do? You meet somebody, you look at their body language. See what kind of energy they give off. Now, once you get into a conversation, you come to discover sometimes things that surprise you. And there's sometimes people you know for many years, and they surprise you when there's a crisis, God forbid, or something else happens that brings out something that you wouldn't have seen. So when we look we look at each other ostensibly, meaning on the surface level, you see very little. So even though this great cliche everybody uses, don't judge a book by its cover, but everybody judges books by its cover. I don't even know who that's meant for exactly. Being that I know a little about publishing, I can tell you, millions and billions of dollars are spent on designing covers. Because everyone judges things by these packages. Go down Manhattan, especially in the holiday season. It's all packaging. Hopefully there's something inside the package that's consistent with the outer look, but it's not necessarily the case. How often have you bought something and the package can be like this, and you open it up and it's all a little thing wrapped in it, but the casing is great. It makes you feel good. So our challenge in life in general, basically you could say the challenge of any intelligence, is to look at something and try to understand what makes it tick, not just what appears on the surface. And it's definitely that case with humans. Just like you don't like to be judged by your cover, you probably shouldn't be judging others by their cover, but how many live up to that dictum? So, to take this a step further, you see, let's say a person cry. Tears come out of their eyes. So no intelligent person will say that first you have tears coming out of your eyes, and then you have a thing called an emotional called sadness. In other words, first you cry and then you become sad. No, it's the other way around. First there's an emotional called sadness, or it could be joy for that matter. And then for some reason that we may not fully understand, that sadness has some type of physiological effect on the body, chemical, whole process, and suddenly the tear duct produces a teardrop that comes out of your eye. So when we look at the teardrop, being that we know that this is a symbol of something, we understand the teardrop has within it a feeling. And it must be mean this person may be sad. Now this doesn't mean everybody that's sad cries. Sometimes you can hide your feelings, obviously. And it doesn't mean everyone that cries is sad either. There's what they call crocodile tears. Do crocodiles actually have fake tears? Is that true? Or is that some type of bias against crocodiles or something? What do you think? Racism? Check into Google, good old Google, you can check it out. The crocodile tears. You have nothing to do tonight. So, the same is true when you see a smile on a person's face. So the smile of the face goes into a certain shape, a contortion. Smile. That smile usually elicits a warm feeling of others. When you see a smile, look at little children, they see a smile, they elicit something. Why does the face go that way? We may never know. Or maybe you could analyze it, I'm not sure. But the bottom line is the face is just expressing a feeling within. No one's going to say first you smile, then you feel good. Why am I saying this? Because basically all of existence, interestingly, really works from the inside out. But we have only one way to perceive it, from the outside in. Just to show you how dissonant our perspective is from reality. Everything you see begins from the outside. Except one thing, yourself. You don't need to look in the mirror to know what you feel like that morning. Even though I know some people have trained themselves to do it that way. But that's not really how it works. It begins from within, and you travels outward. Everything else in life, even the people you love dearly, you can only experience from the outside in. When two people truly fall in love and they become like one, even then, though they may feel for each other and they sometimes can feel what's going on even without being told, still it's not quite like it is with yourself, which is what I addressed earlier, that type of loneliness that exists. We'll get back to that. The point here is that you don't need any proofs to understand what I just said. This is not some type of, you don't have to accept this on religious faith, that there's an inside to work. You just have to look at yourself. You don't need a scientist or a physicist to tell you you have inner workings inside your body that shape who you are, and that's why your body expresses itself a certain way. This is a fact, beyond proof. So then let's look at the whole universe. Why is that not the same thing? With the universe is exactly the same rule. And this is what the mystics would say. The Nishmasa Daraisa, the soul of the Torah, would say, okay, if that's the case with tears and a smile, so why not let's take physical phenomenon. Let's say it rains outside. Is it raining outside tonight? Okay. So when it rains outside, the first thing people do is either take an umbrella, a raincoat. If you're very fascinated by the inner workings, you watch the weather report. You have the weather channel today, 24/7 weather channel. When they launched it no one thought it would succeed, because who wants to see weather all day? But it became very successful, actually. And it's interesting, different theories have been posited about this, and one of them that I like is that people like to feel that they understand what's going on beneath the surface, so to speak. So you see these cloud patterns and atmospheric conditions and so on and so forth. The fact is, most weathermen know about weather as much as you just have to find out what's going on in Cleveland and what way the wind is blowing, and you more or less can predict what's going to happen. I don't mean to be so, but snowstorms in New York are notoriously never predicted. It's usually the other way around. I hope there are no weather meteorologists in the room here. Are there? I don't mean to insult anyone. They are doctors after all. Okay. Well, our opinion about doctors. A lot of PhDs in this world. They're more doctors than patients. Let's put it that way. So the mystics would say that when it rains outside, it's not just what you see, but maybe rain is reflective of a type of spiritual energy. Maybe the angels are crying. Maybe on some cosmic level there's some type of sadness. So just like your body produces tears, the universe produces rain. Now this may sound, I'm not trying to just be poetic here. It means that the universe as we see it, just as it is with your body, which is just a small universe, that a human being is a small universe, and the universe is a large organism. So the entire universe works exactly the same way. We only see it from the outside in. Science and the study of nature attempts to dig beneath the surface to discover laws that can explain different phenomena. The search still goes on for the unified field theory to find out one law that will explain all laws. But nevertheless, no question that the progress on the scientific and technological level has produced, the understanding of the inner workings have produced what we have today. Television, radio, internet, cellular technology, and so on. So the Kabbalists and the mystics will take it one step further, and they'll say that beneath it all, beneath the subatomic particles, there's one more dimension of energy, and it's called spiritual energy. And if you want to understand that level of energy, that's where the Torah has to be brought into the picture. That's the blueprint of existence. That's where it all began. So it didn't begin from the outside and then we work our way in. It began from the inside and we work our way out. If you want to truly understand existence and your life, you have to understand it from inside out. But the fact is, let's say you have a pain, God forbid. We always begin with symptoms. You look at the symptoms, you try to solve the symptom, maybe through a painkiller or a short-term intervention. If that doesn't work, you either go into denial, or if that doesn't work for after a while, you dig deeper and you have to find something deeper. So there's no question there are superficial problems that can be resolved on a surface level, and that's fine. But any persistent problem, anything that is deep-rooted, the problem is we can't go into the root of it. We can't go back to our childhoods and say what happened to me when I was 2 years old or 5 years old. So you have to, in a slow, painstaking process, if that's necessary, go from the outside in and go as far as you can go. I'm not suggesting that every therapy requires going that deep. But sometimes if nothing solves them, you have to go to the root. The Torah is the root of the discussion of existence. You want to understand the human condition and the problems that we exist. This I can definitely guarantee you, if you apply yourself. You understand the Torah's spiritual relevance, psychological relevance, and you'll be able to think not symptom-driven, but root-driven. To look at the cause of things, not just its effects. And I submit as well that most of our problems are because we focus on the effects and not on its causes. Or the causes we think are the causes, but not the true causes. This may sound radical, but I can tell you from my minimal experience, most problems that people define as their problems, I'm not talking about a small, a superficial thing, serious issues. I would say 90% of issues that people think are the issues, what they articulate is never really what it is. And not because we lie to ourselves. It's because we are at blind spots. And the first blind spot is you will usually not identify the real culprit, which is why it makes it so difficult to solve. And that's why Yediyas Hamachla Chetzi Refuah, the expression goes, knowledge of a illness is half its cure. And that's not a euphemism, that's not an exaggeration. It's half the cure. Because when you know the problem, it's like you can spend half your life looking for the answers. Discover the question and you'll be halfway to your answer. Meet the wise person, and the wise person will not necessarily give you the answer, but they'll frame the question in a way that you'll be able to search for the answer. And many of us don't even know the questions. And this again is not meaning, I'm not trying to be critical here, speak to myself as much as to you. It's just an honest appraisal of how we look at life. The fact is, we are seduced and consumed by the externals of our existence. Our sensory tools, our senses, are so overstimulated that you can hardly expect more. At the end of the day, you try to focus on anything that's introspective and deeper, you're exhausted. The day itself, work, the pressures, and all the other stuff that we all have, our so-called issues, responsibilities, all wear us down. Where do you have time to travel inward? So it's not surprising that we are focused as much as we focus, whether we like it or not, on externals and try to solve things in fast ways, in surface level, and we hope for the best. But the Torah's approach is the long, short road, as the Talmud says, which means it may appear long, but it ends short, which means you start from the inside, and you understand the root of something. You can understand that you can frame the problem in a whole different way. And I'm sure you've had this experience where you meet someone who you talk to and you share an issue and they look at it in such a revolutionary new way, you're surprised you never thought of it that way. Even though you struggle with it all your life and you've spoken to many people. Because people who understand things at the root don't look at this, have a different set of eyes. They don't look the same way at things. They don't look at the externals. They never get frazzled. Is that the word, frazzled? Sounds like frazzled. They don't get shaken by externals. Just because something is disturbing, they look for the root. If the root is the problem, even though the outside may look great, they understand it's just a matter of time. So all this long introduction is so necessary because since we're talking about Torah and its message, I'm not just interested in sharing with you an insight on this chapter and its relevance, but also more importantly the tools. So now we look at the story of Jacob, and let's apply this approach. So what is the meaning of Jacob exactly, and what is his journey all about? And you see here, you cannot go into the surface level and talk about it, about a man that lived thousands of years ago and he was escaping from his brother. All that's true. But if we're talking about, if you take the metaphor that I used, that there's an inside and an outside, that's the outside. That's the historical manifestation of the story. But the inner forces are an entire different story. So briefly, the way the Kabbalists and the Zohar and others put it, is that each character in the Torah really represents a prototype, archetype is the right word, archetype. An archetype of a personality. Abraham represents, if you know the spheres and the spiritual spheres, all the building blocks of existence. So there's chesed, love. Isaac represents gvura, which is awe or discipline. And Jacob represents compassion. Or you could say balance, teferes, beauty, balance. And the story of their lives, while we read about certain details of their lives, and some details are completely skipped over, is because the Torah is only interested in the blueprint of existence. It's not interested in telling us a storybook. That's why, for instance, Abraham's life, 75 years of his life, we know nothing about. Not in the Bible, at least. Then suddenly certain periods of his life we talk about. Here, Isaac lived longer than Jacob and Abraham, and yet his story is the shortest in the Bible. Jacob lived 147 years, according to the Bible. Abraham 175, and Isaac 180. And the story about Jacob takes 6-7 chapters. The story about Abraham is 2-3 chapters, and Isaac 1.5 chapters. If you think of it in a historical sense, 4/5 of the Torah, just to make the point, are about 40 years of history. The entire book of Genesis covers almost 2,000 years. The rest is 40 years. From the time that the Jews leave Egypt till the end of the Torah is 40 years of their travels through the wilderness. So if this is a historical book, it's sure out of proportion. The whole thing doesn't make sense. It's missing major gaps. Some things are emphasized and elaborated upon in exhaustive detail. Other things that seem so important are not even mentioned or barely mentioned. And the only answer to that is because the Torah never came to tell us a historical narrative of what happened then. We happen to find out what happened, but it's really telling us is a spiritual narrative of your life and my life today and then. That did manifest at one point in history in these people, in these characters, in these places. But it's all, as I said, talking about things above, a story on a different level. So if you want to identify with these lessons, yes, you can go and hear a Dvar Torah and someone will say, okay, what we learn from Jacob is that he was alone, and therefore we all are sometimes alone, and there are lessons that you can learn. It's much deeper than that. You are Jacob, and Jacob is you. Or to put it more specifically, and this goes long before Carl Jung, the archetypes of the Torah are all parts of your personality. You have an Abraham within you, and an Isaac, and a Jacob, and a Moses, and even an Esau as well. Not just the heroes, also the villains, and a Pharaoh, and an Egypt. And if you think of it that way, the Torah takes on a whole different dimension. Does that negate Pshut Shel Mikra? They say, Ein Mikra Yetzim B'dei Pshut. No, it does not negate the historical facts. They happen. But as far as its true significance and its meaning, if you really want to go, you have to go with this spiritual blueprint. So what is the story of Jacob now and Esau? Briefly, the battle between Jacob and Esau, that is the battle that each of us faces all the time in life. In the words of, to use more scientific language, it's the battle between matter and energy. Just to give you a microcosm of this battle. Light a flame. So Hanukkah is coming, we light Hanukkah. Every Friday evening before sundown, women light and girls light Shabbos candles. Candles are used consistently in Judaism. The menorah in the temple that always burned. God forbid, a death is symbolized by a candle, flame. Why? Because Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the flame of God is the soul of a human being. The closest approximation that we can identify in what a soul and his personality is like is a flame. So observe a flame, and you see a battle going on in a subtle way. It's the battle between the energy and the wick, and the flame and the wick. So to light a flame, you need to have a wick. You need to have fuel. That can be the shape of a candle, or it can be oil. And then you need to light it and ignite it, and the fuel through the wick feeds and turns into a flame. Some things burn, some things don't. What's going on when the flame is burning? Well, the fuel is slowly being consumed, and you could see the flame is yearning, is traveling upward. It defies gravity, and in a way, the wick keeps it grounded down here below. This is a perfect metaphor of the struggle that every human being faces, and it has also to do with our own loneliness as well. We all have what's called in the prophecy of Ezekiel, he calls it V'hachayis rotzei v'shuv. In his vision, which is a cryptic vision, he says he sees the energy running to and fro, rotzei and shuv. It runs and returns. Interesting, by the way, the Hebrew word for electricity is chashmal. Chashmal comes from that verse in Ezekiel's vision, because electricity, we see what's the symbol of electricity? You'll always see a lightning bolt. A lightning bolt is like a Z. Why? Because every energy has two poles, positive and negative. It runs and returns. Bezek, it's like a lightning. It runs and it returns. It's an image of two extremes. Think of the energy of life. What's the energy of life in your own system? The energy of life is the heartbeat and your breath. Both of them are exactly the same, have two poles. You exhale and you inhale, and then your heartbeat goes, your heart contracts and it expands. Without that, there is, God forbid, no life. It needs the two forces. What is it psychologically? Psychologically, Yaakov and Esau, twins. One is a force, a material force. It says Esau was the warrior. Ish Yedid Tzayid, Ish Mulchama, the battler, the warrior. And Jacob, Ish Tam Yeshiv Aholin, is the scholar. He's the, Tam means simple, but it doesn't mean simple like in simplistic. Simple as in innocent. We have two sides inside of us. When we're born, the Jacob force is dominant, the innocence of a child. But then you enter a cruel world and you begin to become a warrior. Because the life around us is one that has challenges. There are many cruelties. You begin to have to defend yourself. So everyone needs an Esav and everyone needs a Jacob. Sometimes we become so warrior-like, we lose our innocence and you can't find it again. How many people do you see at work, they're like sharks? They come home, hopefully they can hold on to some type of purity. But we all struggle with these two forces. Some people say in this world, if you're not going to fight on the terms of this world, you're going to be consumed. And how often has that compromised our own higher values? Many will say, yeah, when you're young, you're naive, idealistic, okay, let them hold on to those dreams. Wait till they hit the real world and they'll find out. Can you hold on to the Yaakov, the Jacob inside of you when you're a warrior in this world? This is a big question. So there's a battle between these twins. And the battle begins, as the Torah says a few chapters back, long before they're born, in pregnancy. So it was a battle that was that God tells Rebecca, Rivka, in the difficult pregnancy, you have two nations inside of you, and they will always be at odds with each other. When one rises, the other one will fall. So nations takes on different shapes throughout history. I'm not going to discuss that now. That's another discussion about the Middle East and the different cousins there. But in the psychological and spiritual terms, it's the battle between the body and the soul, or between our physical needs and our spiritual needs. Everyone here, everyone on earth, has clearly material needs. You need to eat, you need to sleep. As the Talmud says, we all have three things that were compared to animals. You have to pay your bills, all kinds of demands on us. And then there's another part that's called the transcendental part. We all have transcendental needs. Some of us satisfy that through art, through music, through romance, through love, or through faith and spirituality. Sometimes through healthy ways, sometimes not such healthy ways. There's no person on earth that does not have a battle between these two voices. The battle can take on the shape of your home life and your work life. How much time you spend with your family and your children, how much time you are busy at work. So there's always a battle there, because you just can't spend the time both at once, though some people are trying. And the battle takes on the shape, personally, of what you dedicate your life to, how much energy you put into your life. One of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Rebbe Rashab, was the fifth Chabad Rebbe. So he had a Chassid who was a very scholarly Chassid, and a very devout one. But then he went into business. It was called galoshes manufacturing. He manufactured galoshes. And he made a lot of money, because in those days, the streets and the shtetls were not paved. So you can imagine galoshes helped save many shoes. So he became so immersed in his business that one day he comes back to his Rebbe. His Rebbe gives one look at him and says to him, in Yiddish he says, Ich will gesehen a Fies in Galoshen, aber ich will kein gesehen a Kopf in Galoshen. I've seen feet in galoshes, but I never saw a head in galoshes. He basically saw that his whole head, his whole being, his whole spirit was completely immersed in his business. So yes, you have to invest part of yourself. But once it's all, belay lev, they say, once it's completely invested, then it consumes you. Who's controlling whom? So to go back to that analogy I gave before, ask yourself this question. Is your body a vehicle for your soul in this universe? Or is your soul being held hostage by your body's needs? And it can't be both. So you decide which one it is. You don't have to tell me. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a hammer and you're going to knock on a nail, and the hammer and the nail tell you where to put your hand. It seems that it should really work the other way around, right? Where the hand should be telling the hammer what to do. But the physical universe has such a hold on us, in its tentacles, that it's extremely difficult to reverse it. So the Jacob and Esav struggle continues. And now let's go over to that lonely journey that evening. Some say in the Zohar it says in one place that this battle that took place was Yom Kippur night, actually. That night that he remained alone was Yom Kippur. And what does the Torah tell us? It tells us that he went back for the small leftovers, so to speak, the small vessels. The way the Kabbalists put it is this. Each of us in this world is allocated a certain amount of spiritual sparks, which means basically divine energy or opportunities. And your whole life, you will be guided to go find those sparks. But one thing is left only to you, and that is the choice whether you will do something with it or not. To explain it in simpler terms, it means this. Ma'ashem mitzadi gover kananu, the psalmist says, King David. God leads the footsteps of people. So you may be traveling somewhere, and you think you're coming for one reason, but in truth you came really for another. So if a little angel came to you and said, listen, we need you to come to a certain place because there's a spiritual opportunity, you look at your busy calendar and say, I don't have time for that. So what God does is, Mesaviv Sibus it's called, He creates a situation where you convince yourself that it's for business or for vacation or for pleasure or for something else. When in truth, that's a way, a ruse to get you there so that you could reveal a deeper opportunity. That's why the greatest things in life are the ones that are unexpected. And that's where the real opportunities are. We are given in our lifetimes many such opportunities. We sometimes will not grab it because we don't see it or we're distracted by some other agenda. Jacob understood fully his life. He knew that after 20 years spending as a shepherd by Laban, that part of his mission is he has to return home and he has to confront his alter ego. But he wanted to come well prepared and well armed. So he goes back that night and does not leave any detail alone. In other words, it's not just the big things in life that are so important. He understood that there are sometimes a detail. And there's a price to pay. Because of that, he's suddenly isolated from his family and everyone else. And he meets a stranger. And as the words here ring out, Vayishlach Yaakov levade, Jacob remained alone. Jacob is the first expression in existential loneliness. There's no person that will not have a time in their life when they're going to not feel alone. Sometimes that loneliness can take on very terrible and difficult shape and form, and sometimes it's more subtle. And the most difficult one is when Jeremiah the prophet says, Eicha Yoshva Badad, woe that she, Jerusalem, sits alone, as he describes Jerusalem after it was destroyed by the Babylonians. Of all the things, not the destruction of the Holy Temple, not the deaths, the many people dying, not the beginning of an exile, of all the things, it's the loneliness that disturbs him. She sits alone. You know why? Because every challenge can be overcome if you did not think you were alone. No matter how difficult the challenge is and you knew that there are others with you, you'd feel strength. But because we feel we're alone, which is part of the challenge, when something happens to you, you usually isolate yourself. You feel no one can understand what I'm going through. No one has ever experienced something like this. So it may be true, not exactly as you, but do not think that you're the only one that's alone in this world. So what happens is, by isolating ourselves, we also weaken ourselves. So what Yirmiyahu was bothered by, what he's disturbed by, was not just the destruction, that we don't feel that we're connected. So we'll never be able to fight a battle alone. If we knew at least we were together and Jerusalem did not feel all alone, we'd be able to overcome this challenge. Not that it wasn't a great challenge. In our own lives, there's a part that many of us like to either push away, and I know somebody, more than one person, but one person that comes to mind, no names, he or she is not sitting in this room, so. Or maybe you are, let's put it that way. And maybe I'm talking about somebody else, but it's maybe your story, for. And who is a very powerful soul. First time I met this person, I always knew it. But it's a he, I should say. It's a he. But he decided, for whatever reason, energy always goes both ways. Kol hagadol mechaver yitzrei gadol mimenu. The greater a person, the greater their challenges. Put it that way. So he is distracted himself, busy, with all kinds of interesting experiences. And since the first time I met him, and since then it became a running joke. Well, it's more than a joke, it's a tragedy as well. Running away from his own destiny, basically. Trying to relieve, in some fashion, the unbelievable pain he has, because he has such energy. So he keeps himself busy with all kinds of distractions. And some look really good, some look really busy, some look very productive as well. And I'm not even suggesting they're all bad. But it is, essentially, he's trying to relieve himself of the deep existential pain he has. Things have changed for him because he finally came to terms with it. This is no question in my mind. Many of us, we need relief. Where do you think most problems come from? Is the relief from either boredom or loneliness? Teenagers. So I don't deal that much with teenagers, but recently I was asked to speak for a group of professionals who deal with what they call teen at risk. This new title, teens at risk. Actually, the question they asked me was whether in a community where I grew up in, like a more traditional community, if there's lower use of drugs and other so-called substance abuse. So although I didn't take any statistics, and it's hard to really give statistics, especially in some communities, these things are very taboo to talk about, so you can't really determine. But it doesn't really matter. I'm not here to do the statistics. But I told them I could tell you one thing: that everything has a root and everything has a symptom. Why would anybody attempt to take any drug, though they've been warned and been told, and they may even have bad experiences, and they'll still never return to it? It's relieving something. There's a hunger for something. It could be a hunger for a rush of excitement, for a high. It could be tremendous boredom. Anything to get you out of the monotony. So yes, there's no question that you have to deal with the symptoms, short-term solutions. But there's no question in my mind as well, unless you get to the void that's inside of a young, passionate soul, you will never solve the problem. Because if it won't be one thing, it'll be another. So it's true, some people have to hit rock bottom until they do something with their lives. But what's going on is a void. And that very few people can address. Because you have to fill that void with some very healthy nourishment. That's equally powerful to the passions that are released by substances. And some are very powerful, they have very strong effects. Forget about the long-term effect, but for the immediate, it definitely does something for the person, or else no one would become addicted to it. So there's physical addiction, but the psychological addiction is much more profound. And a person who doesn't have such a void usually tells you either their soul is really locked up. I always ask young people, do you have passion? And some people, no, I don't have any. I want to cry. But then the ones that do have passion usually are doing things that are not necessarily so great. So which is a better situation? I would definitely choose the latter, because at least there's life. And then you need the guidance, direction. This is a major, major issue. And I can speak for myself. I was also once a young soul like that. Well, my soul is still young. But I was in a younger body, let's put it that way. They say, I wore a younger man's clothes. And without going into all the details, but I too needed a release from my passion. And at that age, you want to change the world, you don't know how, you're frustrated. And thank God I finally found the healthy things. I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't found that. And it still remains with me. I'm still a 17-year-old in that sense. And I never forget it. So, we're talking here is about a voice inside each of us, the Jacob voice, that unfortunately often will become overwhelmed and overcome by the warrior within us, the one that has to fight the battles. The greatest people you'll ever meet are these older men or women who are not naive at all. They've seen battles in life, and they still maintain their innocence. That's very rare to find. Because you lose your innocence, you get jaded, you get cynical. It's not an easy thing to experience, So this battle between Jacob and Esau is the story of this chapter. And one episode of it is where Jacob goes and realizes that the only way I will ever deal with that part of my life, I have to arm myself. And nothing is too small. He doesn't just say, I'm going to do the big things. He goes back for these pachim ketanim, for these small little sparks. And he finds himself all alone. The spiritual journey is a very lonely one. I know there's a certain glamorous part to it called Kabbalah, spirituality, it's part of the social scene. But the true spiritual journey is a very lonely place. Because you will have to confront the following issue. Many people you will discover will not pay the price. As long as it's glamorous and it's fun and so on. But to truly experience it in the fullest sense of the word is a real heavy price. And there's a lot of loneliness in that place. It's not necessarily an unhealthy loneliness. So how do you deal with that? And that's what Jacob had to deal with. That's why the Torah talks about it as being alone. So he took the bull by the horns, meets the stranger. This is Esau, one form or another, who goes to battle with him. The best time to get somebody is when they're lonely, when they're alone. You don't attack someone who's with an entire group. You are at your most vulnerable when you feel alone, when you feel that there's no one that understands you, when you feel maybe even your life is monotonous. That's all another form of loneliness. And that's when you're most vulnerable. You'll always be attacked there. The Zohar says, a very fascinating description of this whole story, that the stranger attacked Jacob at his weakest point. But being that Jacob was Jacob, he battled. He didn't come away unscathed. You see, he gets wounded, and this wound lasts for generations. It says in the Ramban that the wound that the stranger left Jacob with, he says something really sad. He says that all the wounds of all the tzaddikim and kedoshim, all the people that would be killed by the Crusades, he doesn't mention the Holocaust, of course, because it was before his time, but he refers to was all as a result of this stranger displacing Jacob's hip. That's what he says. That's how he refers to this. So Jacob did not come out intact, but he came out alive, and he came out prevailing. And not only that, he got his name changed to show that he can prevail. So what this means in psychological terms, it means the following. First of all, if you're ever in a place like that where there's real loneliness, you have to find people that you really connect to before you got lonely. You can't connect to people then that don't identify with it. One of the pop singers of our time calls it drinking a cup called loneliness that you're better than drinking alone, right? I think he's a Jewish guy. So there are people in our lives that you connect to in better times. So there is a moment, or more than a moment, where you have a lapse, you have someone or you have something you're connected to. I'll just speak for myself again. I'll use myself as an example. I find that one of the things that keeps me going is commitments I make. So, for example, a commitment to this class, or for all that matter, to this space. So once you get yourself stuck in good things, you can't get out. And that's the best antidote and best solution to these dark moments in our lives. The problem is that our loneliness or other forces often cause us to be afraid to make the jump or make the commitment. So when you are at a point of strength, as Jacob was when he was at a point of strength, you have to arm yourself well. And I say this to all of you, I say it to myself, I say it to every person. Arm yourself well, that you find the right people who understand this journey. And there are people who understand it, and they're ready to pay the price, not just lip service. And those are the people that can help you in the darkest moments. So when there's a sense of loneliness, I'm not saying you're not going to have it. I'm not saying it'll go away that easily. But if you're stuck in something good, you can't get out of it. Sometimes I sit Thursday night when I write my weekly article. And trust me, it's not that easy to write every week. And sometimes I have no clue what I'm going to write about. But I made a commitment. And I know how many emails I'm going to get the next day that are going to say, this is what I support. The guy doesn't write his article, things like that. Or harsher words. Even though I don't owe you anything, but, like that. But there's a commitment. And there's pride. And that and sometimes you sit alone at night and you have to write. It's not easy. Writing is a very lonely experience for anyone that has written knows. But at the same time, if you are able to harness the energy into something that's creative, you can change people's lives. And not just writers, artists. Everyone here has something of that nature. A talent, a skill that is uniquely yours. And it's also you're alone with that skill. Others don't have that skill that you have. That's what makes you indispensable and unique. So think of loneliness as the downside of your uniqueness. That's why you're alone, because it's unique. So the only way to really channel it is to use it as Jacob does proactively, to do something positive with it. And if you can't find what to do with it, I'll be happy to talk to any of you that want a direction in that. I have experience in it, and I have helped many in that direction. And you could help me as well. But I'll be happy. That should not be your excuse that you can't find something weird to channel it. You have to find something that you're unique in and go for it all the way. That's when you become powerful, and that's when you can overcome every dark thing. Remember, every time you don't do it, you get weaker because you lose confidence. So you have to, of course, do it in an environment that's trusting, and not just do that. This people who may attack you or feel you can't rely on. But if you do that, you will basically resolve the issue of existential loneliness. Not that you won't be alone, but in a way you'll make everybody else alone with you, so to speak. Put it that way. Not misery likes company, that's not what I meant, but you get the idea. So the story of Jacob alone on the other side of the river, and the battle that he fights is our story. Each of us will fight such battles. What you learn from Jacob is that you could prevail, and will prevail, even over a power like that. But you have to know that you will have a battle. There's no one that is immune from that. And you know that there were those before us that walk down that path and tread down that path. And they give us strength. And the strength they give us is direction as well. Direction is a commitment to your purpose, to your cause, to your mission. Each of us has our indispensable mission, our indispensable commitment. So Jacob continues the battle with him all night, which also the Zohar emphasizes it's at night, not by day. Battles are usually fought at night. The loneliest time of life is at night. By day you get distracted, everybody's busy, people are awake, there's noise. And the morning arrives, and this stranger, some say the angel of Esau, says, I have to leave. Some say because he had to go, the morning comes, so there's a change of guard, the praise that these angels sing. He had to leave. And Jacob would not let him leave because he knew, I'm not going to fight a battle here just for damage control. If I'm going to fight a battle, I have to come away with something. And what he comes away with is this change of name. The name of Israel, the land of Israel, Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. The name of Jews as Bnei Yisrael. And this is considered to be the most primary name of Jews, even though we're called sometimes Bnei Jacob, but Bnei Yisrael is the more predominant one. Is a name given by Esau to Jacob, the angel of Esau, the stranger. It wasn't given by God, it wasn't given by his parents. So it's interesting. Darkness, the material world gave the soul its name, basically. So the battle yielded something very powerful, that there's nothing that could overcome us, because he was able to, Jacob knew, to redeem the battle, he had to derive something from it, and he got something out of the stranger, even though he was wounded, that would never be returned. And that is the power, as he says, Yisrael, the power to prevail over God himself and over all people. That means there's nothing that could overcome Jacob and his children. Now, knowing that, of course, is a very powerful thing. And I saw the reaction to the Mumbai massacre, as we all did. And unfortunately, it's not the first massacre in history. Not to minimize it, we had a Holocaust just 60 years ago. But unequivocally, the result by the Jewish response has always been exactly what happened with Jacob. That there's nothing that can prevail over us. No stranger and no battle. And the surprising part of it is not because we're in denial and say, we don't know how tragic this was. With all the great cries to God and even the chutzpah that comes from faith, to challenge God to allow any type of massacre. especially one that's so senseless, and against people that were just there for serving, all the people that were killed there because they were Jews and tortured, etc. So you could think, okay, if you're going to be so angry at the situation, that paralyzes you and you don't make a move. Then there are others who just in denial, they ignore the pain and they just blindly move on. The paradox here is that the Jews never stop crying, but they also never stop building. And you see this throughout Jewish history. On a personal level, it's also very true. Yes, this is a lonely world and it's a dark world and there are many challenges. Jews and Jewish teachers and leaders never told the Jewish people it's going to be an easy trip. Never. No one ever said it's going to be easy. Throughout the Torah, you see how difficult it is. In the greatest of times, the whole Torah story is one of tragedy. Even the end of the Bible doesn't end with even on a good note. What's the end of the Torah? You'd think after all the prices paid, Moses ends up at least in Israel. Not him, not his generation. Everyone that left Egypt, except 2 people, perished in the wilderness. So you think you end such a book, you should be very depressed and not have hope. Yet this is the book that gave hope to so many people throughout history. This is a paradox. It's the paradox of understanding the unfathomable power of a soul that refuses to ever resign itself and surrender. But it's also the power of being very sensitive to life and not forgetting that there is deep pain in this world. It's always amazing to me, you see this paradox consistently. When a chuppah is done, a wedding ceremony, you break a glass at the end of the ceremony. Now the highest point of 2 people's lives, their families' lives, they dance one night. Let them dance. Why do you have to remind them? We all know tomorrow morning is going to be a lonely day, or even that night. You have to remind them under the chuppah at the high point that there's something broken in this world, that the temple was destroyed. And the answer is a very psychological one. One of the answers is this, that those people that remember pain in their highest moments of joy will remember joy in their highest points of pain. When you become completely consumed with yourself and your joy, and there's 100%, there's no room, you are completely unaware and insensitive to the fact that there's some people out there that are suffering, even at the height of your wedding ceremony, and God forbid, when your time comes and everyone will have their challenge, you'll become so consumed with grief, there will be no room to get out of it either. The wisdom of Jewish tradition was always the balance. That even when there's almost perfection, always remember there's someone else maybe that's not in perfect situation. Don't forget them, and you will not be forgotten when that day comes. And God forbid, no one should ever know such a day. But it's balance. And this is the battle, this is the way we deal with the struggle between Jacob and Esau. The 2 poles, they will always tug at each other. We should not be afraid of the battle. There's a whole book called Tanya. That really is one underlying message. That the purpose of existence is a battle. Yeah, it's not very life-affirming, you think, if you're going to read this book. Who wants to read such a book? But when you read it, you come away empowered. Why? Because, as I said, half the cure of an illness is knowing. Knowing that you were sent to this earth to fight. And doesn't mean fight that you become a warrior and that's all it is a fight. Knowing that there's a very deep purpose resolved, a deep purpose realized when you fight the resistance you have and you get over it, you overcome challenges, is very freeing. Because you know that it's not an accident. You know you're not alone. You know that you have the power to overcome it, because that's the bottom line. We're told that God says, I will not ask of you anything that you don't have the power to overcome. Now it's a very powerful statement. I've been asked this sadly by some people, parents who gave birth to a child that was not well at all, who asked me, so where's this statement? How is it relevant? Where do we have the strength to deal with such a thing? You can't really say anything. I'm not going to tell them, hey, don't worry about it. You cry with them, but at the same time you tell them, you know something? You do have the strength, and you can do something. And I've seen unbelievable stuff that people can, unbelievable power that has come out of human beings when they rise to the occasion. I'm not suggesting that's a justification, and no one should ever know of such challenges. But every challenge, if you know that you're also given a pekel, a package of strength to overcome that challenge, is a very powerful statement. Again, that doesn't mean we should look forward to such things. So Jacob knows this, and that's his battle with Esau, and it's our battle with our Esavs, and it is a lonely battle. There's no question about it. But when you understand that, in a way, God had to conceal His presence, and that this world had to have some existential loneliness for it to be able to overcome that, and that's through our efforts, that's a great achievement. That means, very simply put, a very practical suggestion I'll make as I conclude here. This year is a Jewish tradition, is a year called Hakel. Hakel was every seventh year, following the sabbatical year, the Torah says, the Jews, men, women, and children would gather in Jerusalem, and the king, the leader of the time, would read certain chapters to awaken their hearts. It was like an inspiration as a new series of cycle of seven began. It was like a beginning, like a type of launch into the life. Essentially, as we go back to our lonelier parts of our lives, the mundane, you always need to have a boost. In a way, every holiday is really that. The holiday season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, as the Medrash says, at the end of Sukkot we celebrate Shmini Atzeres. Why? God says after 7 days, like an analogy, a king, after 7 days spending with his children, before you go off on your lonely journey, let's spend 1 day together, you and I. Ano Malke B'Chadei, God and his children. Just you and I, let's spend together. That's why Shmini Atzeres is 1 day. Again, a lonely single day. But this single day we spend and get strength that we'll be able to carry into the year. And the challenge, of course, is to remember. Is to remember when you forget. So the Hakel was once a 7 years, that idea. So though we don't have the temple today, but the spiritual idea, psychological message is very relevant. And I'll tell you what I think we can apply to each of us. When people, kindred spirits, gather together, there's a certain synergy that comes out of it. This is an antidote to existential loneliness. Why don't you all commit, each of you, in your own way, to, in a timely fashion, once a month, once a week, she's going to commit to once a day, it's usually not going to happen, so I'm not going to suggest that. But something that really works, that you know can work, to gather friends, maybe alternate different hosts, different homes, different environments, and gather to study something together, to learn something together. First of all, it will create an unbelievable bond between people that you may not have bonded with before. Today with Facebook, it's not a difficult thing to organize these type of events. Secondly, and above all, this is preempting loneliness. That doesn't mean you won't be alone, but what you're doing is battling that challenge. You are creating an environment that is one of unity. So even when things may be sometimes a little lonely, the fact that you know that you've initiated a type of harmonic environment, an environment where people come together, share, and without any agenda, that is a great antidote. It's a strength, it's empowering, it's strengthening, and you've done something to weaken the stranglehold of loneliness. That's an example. I don't think anyone here is unable to achieve that. Depends on what level. And if you're lacking a space, we have a space right here. Again, no excuse. I'm getting rid of all the excuses, which will make readily available, as I've said already to all of you, or those that haven't heard this. If anybody wants to study, wants to create a little group, it doesn't have to be study. You can come here and just have a shoot the breeze, if you like. Is that an expression? Yeah. This is see this as an environment like that. So that's one practical suggestion that I would suggest to all of us that we can do, especially this year. And you cannot imagine what kind of preemptive action this can have. So you don't have to wait for something to happen, God forbid. That you just have this going, this can be creating that immunity that helps us protect, helps inoculate us against some of the forces in this world that go in the other direction. So God did create a very lonely universe. As a matter of fact, I once spoke to a singles Shabbaton on the Upper West Side of all places, Mecca of single life, New York. So it was a Friday night, so of course a great opportunity to quote the Medrash that said that God created 7 days of the week. And 7 is an odd number, so Sunday has Monday as a partner, and Tuesday has Wednesday as a partner, and Thursday has Friday as a partner. So there's one odd day left, Shabbos. There's another opinion that Sunday and Friday, Monday and Thursday, etc. So God said, okay, I have one lonely day in the week. What do I do with it? So he looked around and found a lonely group of people, the Jewish people. It's a lonely nation, like a kifsa, a lamb, a sheep among 70 wolves, and I'll match them up. It's the ultimate matchmaker. I'll match Shabbos with the Jewish people. But I always have to qualify this. That's not what I mean when you have to find a shidduch. It shouldn't be Shabbos. You should actually find someone flesh and blood. It's just a idea of there are different ways to so-called resolve the lonely issue. So even though this topic tonight was not about shidduchim and soulmates, though I see some of you perked up when I mentioned it, I guess because it's relevant. So we'll reserve another discussion about that another evening, I promise you. What I did want to say was that we have methods. Know that this is quite deliberate. God created a very lonely universe and made us all feel that we're alone. We do not know and do not feel that we're part of one organism. But it says in Yerushalmi that we are all parts of one large body. Did you know that? Do you feel it? We don't. Because it's concealed from us. With one reason and one reason only. For us to pierce that concealment through effort and not buy into the so-called divine hoax and masquerade that unity is concealed. You have the power to reveal unity in your life and life of your families and friends and community. Hakel is one method to do so. So think of it as a challenge. That's a challenge. So it's not just that you're here to overcome loneliness, you're actually here to battle it, as Jacob battled it, and realize that we have the power to overcome it. It's not the natural state of affairs. It was put in place, but only for one reason, for us to overcome it. So, let us mobilize each other in this battle, and if we do it together, it'll be a little easier. So I invite you to join me in it, and you can invite me to join you in it. And you have any ideas, practical ideas, how this can be achieved, by all means. If you want to, tonight you can create a new Facebook group called The Battle Against Loneliness. You can invite me, I will join immediately. And let's see how many millions can join this war. But it has to be focused not on self-interest and personal gain. Because if it's self-interest and personal gain, self-interest, by definition, divides us. So it has to be driven by something a little higher than that. So, may you all have the strength that Jacob gives us all over the generations. And to transcend the wounds, above all, prevail over everything, even over the divine forces that sometimes try to trick us, Elokim, the concealment, and definitely Anoshim, which is the humans, and may we all ultimately do see in our own time and lifetime, to see the unity among each other, among communities, and the entire world. I want to say as an announcement here, next Wednesday night, you don't even know this, right? This was pre-scheduled even before we came to the space here. I will be doing a class not here, because it's in the upper west. I'm returning to the Upper West Side, JCC. 7:30 will be about just like a pre-Hanukkah discussion. So I won't be here Wednesday night. I'll be there. You're absolutely welcome to come there, but we will be here the next Wednesday and the following one, and please God, with Raquel's support. And I will also announce, just as another form of Hakel and unity, that Hanukkah, on the 25th, we finally finalized the whole program. So I announced, maybe some of you saw the emails. So it'll be a Thursday night Hanukkah bash party of unity and light in the spirit that we're talking about, calling it Light Up the Night. And what it will feature is a pretty irresistible offering, which is let's see, how did they put it? An open beer bar, a delectable donut station, and a gourmet latke buffet. Some of the poets in our office, but actually you'll have that physically, not just in poetry, and of course featuring drums and music and the works. So please, if you're here, share it with your friends. If you want to, last time we did it, it wasn't quite as elaborate like that. We'll do it here in this space, I think right in this area. And last time we did it, the tonic at a club down in East, where is it, the Lower East Side. Well, we almost 100 people couldn't get in. So I'm not saying that to entice you, I'm just telling you that was a fact, so be forewarned. You cannot use your clout with me. Now's the time. So if you'd like to pre-register, reserve now, just talk to Velva right here in the back. Some people have also asked if they can help sponsor the event. Absolutely. Also speak to Velva. Velva, wave. Okay? Feel free to speak to me as well. I'm also speaking in terms with everybody here. And that's Hanukkah. What else do I have to announce? And this Shabbos, I'll be doing the Shabbaton at the one and only Karlbach Shul, also on the Upper West Side. So I revisiting the Upper West Side, and it's I hope there are less singles there than last time I was there. I don't think so, but so I want to wish everybody a very good night. It was an honor and pleasure. And I saw the donut machine today. It's very cute, actually. You make your own donuts and all types of filling. So in case you're hungry. So everyone have a very good night. Until next Wednesday, I'll be at, again, JCC. We'll announce it in the email. If you haven't left your email addresses, just to know all the programs going on here, please do so with Velva as well, okay?